Well, China's military intimidation has been there for at least a week after that visit by Nancy Pelosi, then a congressional delegation. There are many experts on all sides talking about what might or may not happen there on the Taiwan Strait. Dave Sharma joins us now. He's a former Liberal MP, of course, but former ambassador to Israel. Dave, you've written a column in the Australian newspaper today talking about perhaps the lessons for Taiwan in the Israel experience.
Yeah, good morning, Laura. Look, I think what China has used the Nancy Pelosi visit to Taiwan to do is effectively to normalise high-frequency, high-intensity military operations across the Taiwan Strait, effectively obliterating the median line, which has been the buffer zone, which has separated the two militaries. And what that means is that if China does choose to take military action against Taiwan, we will have less warning time, and it will often be difficult to distinguish a normal exercise from an actual military operation. And that's exactly what Egypt did against Israel in the so-called Yom Kippur War in 1973.
Interesting, because I guess the questions are, what's the catalyst and what does an invasion of Taiwan actually look like? But you're saying perhaps there's a bit of a lesson from history here that might not be all that distinctive.
No, it might not. I mean, I think the level of PLA activity we saw across the Taiwan Strait was unprecedented during the week after Nancy Pelosi's visit. And what that does over time, it psychologically wears down the defences of the Taiwanese military. It puts a psychological stress on the population as well, and it can make it hard for them to distinguish between what is normal PLA overflight activity and what is actually the prelude to a more substantial operation. Now, I don't think necessarily that a Chinese invasion of Taiwan is imminent, but what this exercise has done and their response to the Pelosi visit has done is it's lessened the warning that we're likely to get about such an invasion, and as a result, it's given China's leadership more options against Taiwan.
Certainly when the West puts more focus on Taiwan, it does seem to spur on China to want to defend what it thinks is theirs under the One China policy. Is there a bit of a counterproductive move from visits like Nancy Pelosi or a congressional delegation or even the West talking about this as a flashpoint?
Look, absolutely there is. I think Nancy Pelosi's visit was ill-advised and it was ill thought through, and it's had a whole lot of unintended consequences, which has actually worsened Taiwan's strategic position. I mean, Taiwan thrives, and we all tolerate and accept this in this climate of ambiguity where it's notionally part of one China but has a separate identity, and we don't accept any change to the status quo imposed unilaterally. Like Nancy Pelosi's visit was an attempt, if you like, to increase Taiwan's legitimacy in the eyes of the international community, but China's response to that attempt, to her attempt to alter the status quo, has left Taiwan in a worse position. And it's worth remembering here, I mean, the last US speaker to visit Taiwan was Newt Gingrich in 1997. He quite pointedly visited Beijing before visiting Taipei. He'd effectively cleared the visit, if you like, with Chinese authorities. So it was a different type of visit to the one Nancy Pelosi undertook. And I think that's why, I mean, the US administration, the Biden administration, was clearly uncomfortable with the Pelosi visit going ahead, but once it had become public, it became very difficult to walk away from.
It would be remiss of me, Dave Sharma, not to ask you about current domestic politics at the moment. I'm sure it hasn't escaped your attention.
I didn't expect anything less.
I didn't. I thought so. Now, are you surprised by these revelations that Morrison gave himself secret portfolios?
Look, it's certainly unconventional and unorthodox. He's made some explanations for it. To me, I mean, look, there's well-known systems within, or well-known procedures in place within the Westminster system of government for continuity of government. And I'm not convinced that these sorts of extraordinary arrangements were necessary to ensure continuity of government. There are always systems in place where if a minister falls ill or a minister becomes incapacitated, someone else can be sworn in as minister quite quickly. And I don't understand why those normal procedures were not followed in this instance. I've read Scott Morrison's justification for it. I accept the good faith of his rationale, but these were rather unusual things to have done, and I think the public deserved an explanation at the time as to why they were being done.
You accept the good faith of his rationale. I'll tell you what, a lot of his former colleagues are not as forgiving. What do you think this says about his character, or does it say anything about his character, how he ran government, how he ran the election campaign?
Well, look, I think it's important to be clear, though, here that there's no evidence or suggestion that he abused these powers or even indeed exercised these powers, except for one decision concerning an offshore oil and gas licence here. So it's not as if he's tried to, appoint his horse as consul or something like that. I think we need to keep it in perspective here. But I would say that it seems unusual that it was only Greg Hunt, the health minister, who was advised of these arrangements, and the other ministers who were very close to him and exercised their portfolio responsibilities were not aware that there was another portfolio minister in charge. And I presume the departments themselves who provide advice to these ministers and seek decisions from these ministers were not aware either. And that's it's a rather unusual situation. I don't think there's a particularly good explanation. Unfortunately, I don't think it helps Scott Morrison's legacy, which I think in many respects is a positive one, but I think this one requires some explanation.
There's been lots of analysis as to why you did lose the seat of Wentworth, and I'm sure there will be more once that actual formal review is completed and we just don't see leaks. Given that we have seen some of these leaks, though, and people speaking anonymously about it, I think it's fair to ask you what you think went wrong.
Oh, look, I think there's, the campaign itself, we ran a pretty good campaign within the constraints that we had, I think. Certainly there are things we could have done better, but the biggest fundamental feature was the national picture. I mean, the government was unpopular. It's not controversial to say that. It's not exceptional to say that. Scott Morrison, as the Prime Minister, did not poll well in my seat. And I think, to be honest, we had become, as Liberals, too closely associated with some of the Nationals and the LNP figures in the party whose views do not resonate well in seats like mine. And we'd failed to distinguish our brand. And I think that's really what hurt us. I mean, the number of times people tried to link me, and I'm a different person obviously, but to people like senior Nationals figures or Scott Morrison or Barnaby Joyce, that was the main attack line against me. And people, I think, voted with a national view in mind that they wanted to change the government.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting this week, Allegra Spender's brother is funding a Liberal women's network. He is a Liberal, and I guess he essentially thinks that some of these teal candidates should never be teal. They should have always been Liberal. What do you think about that?
Well, look, I think I'm not aware of that story, but that's good on him. I mean, I'm always supportive of trying to make sure that the Liberal Party encompasses and encourages people from all walks of life to put their hands forward for elected office. But I just make the point that if that was indeed the desire of the Teals, they've got a pretty strange way of going about it, because the people they targeted and successfully targeted were all Liberals, were all at the progressive end of the Liberal Party, and what they've succeeded in doing is getting all those people out of Parliament. Now, is the Liberal Party better off as a result of that or not? I'd suggest not. And I think, is governance in Australia better off with an opposition that is less representative of Australia as a whole? Again, I'd suggest not. So if that was their purpose, then I don't quite get why they weren't targeting seats where they found the Liberal sitting member and his or her views to be particularly offensive, but instead they targeted quite the opposite.
Now that you're outside of politics, what's your view? Do you have enough time between being in Parliament and having a break to kind of see how broken or otherwise it is?
Look, I'll certainly make a contribution to the lessons learned after this election loss, and I've made a contribution to the review that Brian Loughnane and Jane Hume are undertaking, and I'll continue to make a constructive contribution to the direction I think the Liberal Party should be going in. Whether I've got elected office, though, in my future or not, which I think might be the question you're getting at, I'm really not sure. I'm not ruling it out, but I'm also not ruling it in. I'm going to get on with my life. It was a privilege to serve Wentworth for the term that I did in Parliament, and I've always enjoyed public service. So I'll find a way to continue to contribute, but quite what the vehicle is for that, only time will tell, I think.
Yeah, 3 times might be a charm, Dave Sharma. It's not like you haven't worked for the first 2.
I have contested 3 elections in I think 4 years, all of them tough. So I'm glad for a break right now.
Okay, Dave Sharma, great to have you back on the show. We'll see you soon, no doubt.
Thanks so much, Laura.